Welcome, Matina Zakkas. So you're new to our video chat, so welcome.
Oh,
Uh,
very happy to be here.
you're the director of Earth Empire.
I am.
Now, if we describe that, you're a horticulturalist and a garden designer, and you don't want to say that 5 times fast. It's a bit of a mouthful. So tell me, what exactly is a horticulturalist and garden designer?
So a horticulturalist and garden designer is someone who has been trained, if you like, with a lot of technical knowledge with regards to plants and soils
Right.
and microclimates that are going to be able to make that environment thrive. So we have the sort of knowledge that determines where to plant what and how it's going to look good in 5, 10 years time from now as well, and maximizing the space and the environment in which you're planting those plants as well.
And the garden really is an extension of the home, isn't it?
Totally.
Especially in Australia.
Said that. Yes, absolutely. And it can't be ignored. I mean, we're lucky enough to be living in an environment where we have ample front yards, ample back gardens. Well, for most of us, not all of us. So to plan a house, to design a house, you know, to execute a design without the garden in mind, can sometimes not deliver the best results, I think.
Right. Now, when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned a term that's used in gardening and also is used in architecture, which I had heard before. Do you want to just share that with us?
Sure. So genius loci is the term. It's a design.
Genius loci.
Genius loci. I think it's Latin. Most of these terms are. So
Latin, can't remember a thing.
there you go. So with regards to genius loci, it's all about designing with the sense of place in mind, to design with the spirit of the place in mind. And the idea is to be able to marry the landscape and the architecture from a garden design perspective so that it comes together, so that they marry, if you like, visually jarring. You're taking advantage of your entire landscape so that it looks united, if you like, and complementary to each other.
So here's a question. I know that architecture reflects in jewellery styles. So Art Deco has a very angular approach in jewellery. Does that transpose to gardening in terms of the lines, or is it a little bit different?
It does. It absolutely does. Obviously, when you're designing a garden, you're going to take, client feedback. But as a general rule of thumb, yes, you would design a garden and you would take your design cues from the architecture, basically.
All right, we've had an architect on, and I think you've seen those videos. Now, he had one of his favourite architects, Tadao, who is Japanese. Now, I've got one of his photos here. I'd love your take on what you would do to perhaps marry that garden in with, and I'll share my screen, in with this. So it's, from my impression, I'm not an expert on this particular architect. He uses a lot of warm lights in the photography I've seen internally, and I think that that's needed with that sort of harsh exterior. What would be your take here?
Yeah, so I do love this architecture, and obviously it's very modernist, and the beauty of it all is in its simplicity. So I think it would be vital to be able to carry that simplicity into the garden as well. So, there's a huge emphasis on strong lines, right angles, big open concrete boards, if you like. So we need to be able to replicate that in the garden to create some sort of unity between the two. So in these sorts of environments, what looks really good is to be able to show restraint with your planting palette. Don't do too many plants, because obviously there's not too much going on with the architecture in terms of all the finishes, if you like. But it's also important that there's some contrast, because there's a lot of concrete there. So to bring some sort of life and contrast into the garden would be nice. So these sorts of buildings look really great with, mass planted grasses, if you like, and creating vertical interest as well, so as to help draw the eye upwards.
Okay, quick question. What type of grass to have that very neat look? I'm really interested in that.
Okay, well, I guess it all depends on the height that you're looking at. But as you know, Australian natives are fabulous. So a lot of the lamandras would do very well like that. Pennicetums would be great. Miscanthus. So, and because there's no movement in this building, I find that when you take a look at grasses where, you know, the slightest breeze helps create a bit of motion in the garden, it really helps complement this sort of space and also just inject a bit of life and movement into the garden, if you like.
Right.
So, you know, bottle trees would be fabulous, or in, you know, like a red maple to contrast against the neutral background would
I
be.
would definitely go a red maple. That I can see that definitely working.
Yeah.
All right, I'll throw another one at you. This is one I went through recently with Kay and Burton. I might just take you back to, you can see there's a wide expanse, but it's actually a 60s home. And I might take you back to the facade. Now, absolute classic 60s, one of my favorites.
Fabulous.
We don't see a lot of it around the Hawthorn East area, and this was actually in Hawthorn East, so it really stood out because there's not many of them there. So what would you do, just in a nutshell, to complement a 60s home?
Okay, so the 60s, in terms of the architecture of the time, I mean, that was an exciting time because, you know, we're moving back into an era of prosperity.
Yes.
It was a real native awakening. So they were sort of moving away from lawns, etc., and really embracing native plantings and diverse design, if you like. So given that, you know, there's a real push for native and native fusion in our gardens today as well because of the water wise and drought tolerance that they offer, the benefit. I would still love to embrace that in a garden like this. Now, in this particular instance, obviously a lot of the features of the house are elevated. So, I mean, I would love to remove some of that shrubbery from the front in order to be able to allow people to actually view the architecture. But I would be looking for contrast in foliages, so strappy plants versus lots of small leafed shrubs, if you like, to be able to create some visual interest, but hide the fact that the house is, you know, sitting on columns or stilts, if you like, and most of the visual interest is in the upper story. Mm-hmm. So I'll try and fill the bottom of that garden bed and then draw the eye up. And not forgetting, I mean, when you're sitting inside a house like that, you're obviously looking out to your garden from an elevated perspective. And, you know, something like a dwarf corymbia or dwarf gum trees, if you like, mm-hmm. which when in flower also brings some of the native birds to pretty much the level at where you're sitting, would be just stunning.
Yes. Now, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's very smart. All right. Well, look, thank you. We've covered a lot. It's a bit lengthy today, but I think everything was really valuable, and I look forward to catching up with you next time.
Certainly. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.